Hello everyone, welcome to the 10th session of the Month of Evolution. As you know from the previous sessions, this year we are holding the 6th of annual Evolution Days online as Month of Evolution and going international collaborating with every major. We started on Darwin Day, which is the 12th of February, and we'll finish on the 13th of March. We are so happy to share this period with you.
We will start with Dr. Hare's presentation. If questions arise in your mind during presentations, you can write them to chat. Our question team will edit and forward your questions. You all know this year's event is organized in difficult conditions, and we try to do our best as Boğaziçi University Science Club students. We are grateful to all our speakers and participants for making the Month of Evolution happen these days. At this point, we feel the need to inform you.
We are standing with our friends who got arrested during the protest against the non-democratic rector appointment that happened on the 2nd of January. Although classes started 5 days ago, there are still 9 days left until the trial day of our friends. Right of education cannot be disrupted. We don't accept, we don't give up, and we won't bow down. In any case, we will try to bring science to you.
As Boğaziçi University Science Club, our goal is to facilitate access to science and accurate information, to spread scientific thinking, hereby to contribute to scientific enlightenment, which is our common dream, as we can. Today we are with Brian Hare from Duke University, and thanks to Aslan Niksarlı, we invited Dr. Hare, a very valuable person who studies the evolution of society. Now I want to give the floor to our dear mentor, Aslan Niksarlı.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dr. Hare, for having you here. Is a great privilege, and we're very much excited. So we started today with Dr. Shinya Yamamoto, and now we have Dr. Hare. And Dr. Hare is a core member of Center of Cognitive Neuroscience and professor in evolutionary anthropology in Duke University. And after graduating in Harvard University in 2005, or in 2000. Right? Yeah, good. He also awarded Sofia Kovalevskaya Award, which is very hard to pronounce, but you know what I mean. He is very well known with his studies with bonobos, and now he's currently working on dogs. He actually recently, not recently, but published a book with co-author Vanessa Woods and Genius of Dogs, which I recommend everyone. And so he has many awards, and he has published more than hundreds of scientific papers. And I don't want to talk too much. I just wanted to thank you, and I'm sure this will be a very inspiring talk, and we're looking very much to hear you. And when you're ready, you can put up your slides and we can start.
Okay, awesome. Let me get the slides before I say thank you.
Sure.
Make sure that's working.
Okay.
Let's see. How about that?
Okay, we can see it. It's great.
Okay, is that good?
Yes,
Yep.
Everything's good.
Okay, great. Well, Aslan, thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be with y'all. I'm sorry we can't be in person, but you know, the advantage of not being in person is that I can be here and travel across the world and share a little bit about my research and still be sitting in the comfort of my office at home. So I'm so touched and honored to have been invited, and it's just a thrill that I can share a little bit about our work on dogs and bonobos and what they teach us about humans. And given the message in support of students protesting for democracy, I think towards the end of the talk, I think what we're going to see is that this kind of work is actually relevant to thinking about how we organize our societies and have a friendlier future. So that's really the theme of the talk, is where we're going to go. All right, so before I go too far, I have to thank not just you, my audience, and my hosts for this event, but also all the people who helped make all this research possible. There's a whole network of brains that work together to make the research I'm going to tell you about possible. And I'm so thankful to all of them, and you can see them here. All right, so Aslin, she mentioned one of the books I wrote with my wife is called The Genius of Dogs, but we have a new book called Survival of the Friendliest, and that's actually the title of my talk today, is Survival of the Friendliest, and understanding our origins and then rediscovering our common humanity. The goal of the talk is to think about how can we have a friendlier future. If you're interested, the book is on sale anywhere you can buy books, but if you don't want to buy a book and you want to read the scientific argument, there's a summary paper that kind of summarizes the arguments in the book, and it was in Annual Reviews of Psychology in 2017 called Survival of the Friendliest. So you can find it that way. I'm on Twitter. Please follow me if you want. I will follow you back, and I love to see what's going on all over the world. Okay, that's the British cover. All right, so survival of the friendliest. What in the world could I mean by survival of the friendliest? Because we're here talking about evolution and Evolution Month. Of course, everybody knows survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest, often in popular culture, has been misconstrued or misunderstood to mean that the biggest, toughest, meanest, angriest, nastiest is the one that's going to have an advantage. And that's actually a misunderstanding of the word fitness, because survival of the fittest really just is referring to fitness, biological fitness. And fitness is just defined as your ability to reproduce and leave offspring. So survival of the fittest really means your ability to reproduce. And it's been misunderstood to mean that you're big and mean and that you are alpha and stronger than others, or your group is somehow superior to others and therefore has more value than other groups. And that is not what evolutionary theory or survival of the fittest actually means. And so Vanessa and I, we wrote the book, Survival of the Friendliest, and the talk I'm going to tell you about, I think, pushes very hard back against this idea. And the first thing I want to present is the idea of survival of the friendliest, that I'm very serious about this scientifically. In fact, if you take a step back and you look at the most successful organisms or classes of organisms on planet Earth, it is almost always a story of an increase in friendliness that allowed for a new form of cooperation that then allows those organisms to be so successful. It's much rarer to find an organism that's become more competitive somehow or more aggressive, and that's what allows them to thrive. So if you take, for instance, flowers giving insects pollination or food through pollination, if you take organisms grooming each other, like this warthog and mongoose, my favorite is the cleaner wrasse, where you have fish that actually go inside of the mouths of predatory fish, of fish that eat other fish, and they clean their mouths for them. That is ridiculous, but in terms of, it doesn't make any sense evolutionarily at first pass, but it makes a lot of sense if you know that the predatory fish gets their mouth cleaned of parasites and the cleaner wrasse gets a nice meal. And this interaction is going to be important as we move forward through the talk, because I think it really kind of is a great representative of what survival of the friendliest is. It is fear of a predator. In the case of the cleaner wrasse, was replaced with an attraction. They became not only not fearful of predatory fish, they actually became attracted, so they swim in their mouths. Another example of survival of the friendliest are penguins in Antarctica. There's only one terrestrial vertebrate that can live year-round on Antarctica without fossil fuels to supplement their survival there, and it is the penguin. So how do penguins do it? Well, I'm sure in Turkey and in Istanbul, there are birds that, like pigeons, that space themselves anytime they land anywhere, and they might be together, they're social, but they don't want to be right next to each other. They don't want to sort of cuddle or hug. And that's what penguins do all winter. They smash together into a tight hug, cuddle ball, and that allows them to stay warm. They're attracted to each other. They invade each other's personal space, and they're friendly. They don't have fights. They're very welcoming of others mashing up against them. And that snuggle, cuddle, hug is what helps them make it through the winter, because it keeps them warmer. And of course, there are also examples of species like in North America, there's this carnivore called the coyote, and it's hunting together with a badger, a much smaller badger, because each of these has a special hunting ability. Okay, so I present all of these cases as examples of survival of the friendliest, where actually a new form of friendliness led to a new form of cooperation. It's something that Darwin reflected on in The Descent of Man as being something that would be really, really important for survival. So it's not even that Darwin didn't think about the importance of survival of friendliness. In fact, he emphasized it in chapter 3 of Descent of Man. All right, so enter the dog. My story with survival of the friendliest and thinking about how it shapes cooperation actually started with our work with dog cognition and dog psychology. And what we discovered was that dogs sort of have an unusual ability to understand the cooperative communication of humans. So I'm just going to show you some data that led us to make this realization. And then it becomes puzzling why dogs so distantly related to us have this remarkably human-like cooperative communicative ability. And so we're going to talk about where it comes from. Okay, and then that's gonna start us off thinking about bonobos and humans. All right, so we did a series of cognitive tasks where we had dogs and chimpanzees and human infants around 30 months of age, 2.5 years of age. They played a series of 8 games, and 4 of the games were social games where they had to read the gestures of another person and understand the cooperative communicative intention behind the gesture, that they were trying to, and the intention was that someone's trying to help you and you're trying to search for something, so you need to use the gesture to find something. And then we had another 4 games that were all about the physical world. They weren't social problems, things about finding things in space or making an inference that if you hear a noise someplace, it's in one hiding place versus another, that the thing you're looking for is in the hiding place that made the noise, etc. And we compared all 3 species and a large number of individuals in each species on all 8 of these games. And what we discovered was that on the social measures, dogs are more skillful than our closest great ape relatives, chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans. So if you were to ask me what species is most like a human infant in reading cooperative communicative gestures, it's actually dogs. Dogs are the most human-like in terms of reading and understanding human gestures. But when you looked at the physical abilities, don't ask your dog to help you with your physics homework. Our other closest relatives are much more human-like, and great apes and humans are more similar to one another. But it raises this question: why is it that dogs are better at this social communication and so human-like, even better than our closest great ape relatives? And adding on to that, we discovered that it's not just that dogs are sort of performing better in terms of getting more correct choices when they play these games. It's also that when you look at individual differences, the pattern of individual differences is more human-like. And I'm going to show you that data next. So this is the individual pattern of performance on the social games versus the physical games. And what I mean by that is it's like when you're in school and you take an English class and the question is, how you perform in English class on one English essay, does it predict how you will do on all the other English essays? Or does it not only predict how you do on English, but also it predicts how you'll do on math? Okay, so and vice versa. How you do on one math problem, does it predict only how you're going to do on math, other math problems, or does it also predict how you're going to do writing your English essays? Okay, so what we found was that how you perform on one of the social problems in humans really only predicts how you're going to do on the other social problems. It doesn't really predict how you're going to do on the non-social problems. Okay, so what that means is there's two types of cognition. There's social cognition and there's physical cognition, and it's really organized in our minds in a separate way. There are two types of cognition that vary independently from one another across individual humans. So what did we find when we looked at chimpanzees? Well, we didn't find that pattern. We didn't find, it ends up that how they perform on one problem in the social task doesn't predict how they perform on any other social task. And vice versa on the physical task. But when we looked at dogs, they actually have the same organization that we see in chimpanzees that we see in young human infants. They have the human-like pattern of individual differences. So they have a separate social domain from their physical domain. So it's not just that dogs' human-like cooperative communicative skills express with dogs doing better at understanding humans than great apes when they play these gesture games, but it's also the case that dogs have these separate cognitive domains like human children do, one social, one non-social. Wow, where does this come from, right? If it really is true that dogs are more human-like in this way, in particular a skill that's so important for the development of cultural cognition in children. As kids learn to cooperatively communicate and use gestures, that then sets up their ability to develop all sorts of cultural cognitive skills to understand others. It's the first window into other people's minds. It's so important for children in learning language as well. Why would this skill be in dogs? So that's the next question we're going to ask. So what we did is we went and looked at wolves, and we compared them to wolf puppies, and we compared them to dog puppies. And I also studied a population of foxes that one was selected for, one was domesticated, and one was sort of a control population. And what we discovered was that dog puppies, even as young puppies, as young as 9 weeks of age, they're performing above the performance of wolves that were raised by people. So it's not that dogs just got their unusual ability to read cooperative communicative gestures of humans from their ancestry with wolves. So these figures just show we give repeated chances for all the animals to try to solve this problem. We point to one of two places where food is hidden or an object is hidden, and they just have to search for it. And there's a 50-50 chance. So you can see here, chance is this line. This line is designating 50-50. And if you're above that line, that means you're performing above chance. And so you can see dogs are way above chance. They're at 80% of the time they're making the correct choice, and wolves are sort of at 60. And we found the same thing with the foxes that had been domesticated versus the control population. So we think it's domestication that allowed dogs to be so good at cooperatively communicating with us and understanding humans in this new way. Also, subsequently, work in Japan by Professor Nagasawa was able to demonstrate, and his colleagues was able to demonstrate that dogs have evolved an oxytocin loop, where there's a connection that's made either through physical contact or eye contact, not just a connection through the physical touch, but also a physiological connection where as humans and dogs interact, it increases the oxytocin in the dog and the person and allows for social bonding. And that same oxytocin loop was not seen when it was measured in social interactions between humans and wolves. So it seems that through domestication, not only do dogs cooperatively communicate with us in a new way, but also they have a physiological response to us, and we have a physiological response to them that is the same mechanism that allows for social bonding between human infants and their parents. So it really is the case that dogs evolved in a way to be our best friends. Okay, so I'm going to take you back and revisit those domesticated foxes, though, because they actually help us understand a little bit more what may have happened and what may have led to this remarkable evolution in cognition and neurophysiology related to social interactions. So the domesticated foxes were actually domesticated in Siberia by Dmitry Belayev, Ludmila Trut, and Irina Plyasnina and their colleagues over many decades. They selected a population of foxes to be friendly to people. So they basically would stand in front of the foxes, and if they, like the cleaner rats I introduced in the beginning, if instead of running away from people, the foxes ran towards the people and wanted to be friendly and interact, they would take two very friendly foxes and they would breed them together. And they did that over 50 years. Every year during the breeding season, they mated together the friendliest foxes. And they created this population of foxes that are super friendly and attracted and love to interact with people. And I got to go work with them. I went to Siberia and I saw them with my own eyes, and they are so sweet and they are so friendly and they want to jump up in your arms. But they also kept a control line. The control line was bred randomly for how they interact with people. So they didn't do the friendliness selection. They just bred them and made sure that they were healthy, but they didn't breed them as in relation to their interaction with people. So what did they see? Well, in these foxes, I already told you that the control line and the experimental line are different in their ability to understand humans in the same way that dogs and wolves are. So the experimental line are better at reading human gestures and understanding cooperative communication in humans than the control line. But it's much more interesting than that. It ends up that obviously the selection changed the behavior of the foxes, so they're very interested and want to interact with people, as I told you already. But it changed their physiology. They have a physiology that is a lower stress physiology, so they have much lower corticosteroids response to stressors. They have a lot more serotonin circulating in their body as adults. The selection also changed how they develop. They actually develop behaviors that allow for friendliness much earlier in their development, and they maintain those behaviors for much longer during their development. Their bodies change. They got curly tails. They also, some of them have floppy ears, and their face changed. Their muzzle, or their mouths, actually reduced in size, kind of like a bulldog or something. They're a little bit shorter, not as extreme as a bulldog, but they got shorter like a bulldog. And then we see that their cooperative communicative abilities, as I told you already, were altered as a result. So the selection on friendliness, we think, altered developmental pathways that then had a cascading effect on the phenotype. And through just selecting on friendliness, you get a big suite of changes that were unintentionally altered because they're just byproducts of the development and the pathway that's changed. To make a fox friendlier, you have to change a lot of other things accidentally, because what you have to change in development early to have a less aggressive, more friendly fox also has impact on other systems in the body. And then you get all these effects across the phenotype. Okay, so what an amazing model to then think about evolution, and especially cognitive evolution and the evolution of cooperative communication. So what we think happened is the same process occurred in dogs, and we've gone and looked at dogs and evaluated, do we see kind of the same changes when we compare wolves and dogs that we see in the foxes? And we think the answer is yes. We think that that basically 15 to 25,000 years ago, when dogs began evolving from wolves, and remember that's all hunter-gatherers at that point, there's no agriculture, that wolves were at an advantage if they were attracted to human settlements and they could eat garbage or even human feces, and had a reliable ecological source that then could select for friendliness. that friendliness being an attraction to humans, the exact same selection pressure that was used in the Belayev experiment in the foxes. And we think that all those changes we see in the foxes also occurred in dogs as a result. Now what I'm going to argue is, and we're going to switch gears, and we're going to think about this situation in the case of bonobos and even humans. And you see up there it says natural selection, because the foxes are obviously created through artificial or human-driven evolution. But natural selection can easily shape an organism based on their individual differences in friendliness. It's just that the payoff of being friendly in the ecology has to have an advantage. And so that could easily happen. And so we think selection for friendliness is a really powerful way to think about evolution and test some of our ideas about how cognition and other systems evolve over time. So the overall system, the overall model is that you have an increase in fitness due to friendliness, that it changes the development of the organism as a result of natural selection favoring friendliness. You have these accidental byproducts, the equivalent of the curly tail or the floppy ears in the foxes. And one of those byproducts is cooperative communicative ability. And the thinking is you're attracted to a social organism that you used to be afraid of. Now you can use your cognition that you usually use with individuals you have social interactions with. Now you can use it with this thing you used to be afraid of. And so that's a new social interaction, and it's a new expression of your cognition. All right. And so we think there's a lot of candidates in nature for self-domestication is what we call it. The idea that it's not domestication through artificial selection, it's domestication through natural selection. And so we call it self-domestication, meaning the species through natural selection is domesticating itself. So we can test this model. And bonobos have provided us a very powerful candidate species to look at whether natural selection could actually cause that process we see there, the fitness through friendliness, changing development, leading to byproducts and increases in cooperative communication. All right, so this is a beautiful bonobo at Lola Ya Bonobo in Kinshasa. It's a sanctuary for orphan bonobos where I spent a lot of time working with bonobos. Her name is Samindwa, and she is an alpha female there. And that's an important thing to know about bonobos, is that 1 to 2 million years ago, female bonobos, and I'm going to be anthropomorphic here just for fun and simplicity, female bonobos woke up about 1 to 2 million years ago and decided that they were tired of male aggression. Something in the ecology allowed females to form coalitions and friendships in a way that chimpanzee females cannot. And that set off selection for friendliness. Friendly males actually were at a huge advantage over aggressive males. There was just a paper published yesterday from a long-term field site in Uganda showing that aggression in male chimpanzees and trying to be alpha and dominate is extremely costly energetically, and it is very taxing on their immune system. So if you could have selection, natural selection favoring friendliness where you didn't have to pursue being alpha, it's actually a major advantage. As soon as being alpha no longer pays any dividend, it's easy to see how being friendly would be very advantageous. And so females preferred friendlier males, we think. And because they preferred to mate with friendlier males, there was really strong natural selection for friendliness in bonobos. That's the hypothesis. So where do bonobos live? Bonobos live south of the Congo River. You can see the Congo River here. The three main subspecies of chimpanzees are depicted there. And bonobos only live south of the Congo River. So 1 to 2 million years ago, they were separated from the other species of chimpanzee, or their common ancestor got separated, and then there was a speciation event south of the Congo River. And we think one of the major selection pressures that shaped bonobos was this selection against aggression in males, where females actually were able to have a lot of female choice and choose the friendlier males. All right, so together with my colleagues Richard Wrangham and Victoria Wober, we came up with this specific hypothesis about self-domestication in bonobos and proposed a model. I'm just going to put it here and highlight the fact that we wrote a paper about it at Animal Behavior in 2012. You can go read it at Hare et al. 2012 in Animal Behavior if you want. But the idea is that bonobos became isolated south of the Congo River. Ecological conditions favored females being friends and forming coalitions. That then changed the cost of male aggression. It made it too costly for males to try to be dominant, because if you were one male or even multiple males trying to form a coalition against a larger female coalition, the whole system breaks down and the payoff of being mean and alpha no longer works, because the females can overpower you with their coalition. So it doesn't make any sense anymore evolutionarily. And now you have selection for friendliness. And if there was selection for pro-social or friendlier males, then we'd expect the developmental pathway to be altered and then see the byproducts that we've talked about. So we went out and compared a population of captive sanctuary living bonobos that I told you about in Kinshasa, Lolaya Bonobo, and to a sanctuary that Jane Goodall actually founded. And I know that she's going to be speaking to you soon, so that's why I mention it. There's a sanctuary in Congo Brazzaville in Pointe Noire, the city on the coast in Congo Brazzaville. There's a sanctuary called Chimpunga, and we compared the bonobos at Lola to the chimpanzees at the sanctuary Chimpunga there, and we went back and forth across the Congo River for many years doing these studies. And so we have dozens of studies where we've done these comparisons and tested our novel predictions, but I just want to show you one to highlight sort of one of the most fun differences we were able to show that I think supports this idea of friendliness. So this is an experiment that was done by Susie Kwatwinda, who is a Congolese student, and Kinji Tan, who is was a graduate student of mine from Duke. And what we tested was the idea that bonobos, would bonobos share food with another bonobo? And so this is what the paradigm looks like. This is going to be a young 4-year-old female bonobo is going to come in, and she's going to have the choice to eat some delicious food. She hasn't eaten breakfast. She's super hungry. She can just eat all the food, or if she wants, she can open a one-way door and let another bonobo in to share some food. So let's see what it looks like. All right, so sharing is fun. I hope you believe me. That I love the end of that clip where she's kind of rubbing her arms on the floor and said, "Woo, it's fun." Okay, so what you saw there is an example where Sake actually opened the door for Aleke, the other bonobo, and they shared the food together. And we ran many of these tests, and what we found was that the bonobos often opened the door for another bonobo. They never were aggressive with one another. They didn't always share the food, but they often shared the food, and they were not aggressive with each other, and they enjoyed often eating together. So that's interesting in and of itself, but even more interesting is we decided, what if we gave them the choice of who to share with? What if we gave them the choice of either sharing with somebody they knew very well from their own group, or a complete stranger, somebody they had never had an interaction with physically? And so this just represents the two doors and the keys that you could open to the one-way doors that you could use to open and let someone in. And this is our subject. Imagine this is Saki again, and there's the food. She can just eat all the food, or she could let in a group mate, or she could let in a complete stranger she's never met with. When you give humans this problem, typically people will share with someone they know, not with a complete stranger. unless that stranger has something that they happen to identify and like about them. But generally, people would prefer to share with their own group mate, their family. So what do the bonobos do when we ask them this question? What do they prefer? Well, it ends up that bonobos prefer to share and open the door with a stranger. They actually are what's called, they show a xenophilic tendency. They like strangers. They're attracted to new bonobos. And this, to me, was one of the most shocking findings, just demonstrating how male bonobos and male aggression has been so strongly selected against, that bonobos have evolved a psychology where they prefer strangers. Because in chimpanzees, I couldn't even do this experiment. It would be too dangerous and unethical because they would hurt each other if they let in the stranger. They would have a big fight. The last thing that you would do is let in a stranger, who might, injure you or you might have a fight with. So in bonobos, they not only will let in a stranger, but they prefer to let in a stranger. And the reason, we think, is because lethal aggression, territorial aggression that exists in chimpanzees has been selected against as a byproduct of selection for friendliness in males. Male bonobos in the wild have never been observed to kill another bonobo, unlike chimpanzees. They don't form coalitions against females or other groups. They don't have territorial border patrols, etc. And we think this test is just an example of demonstrating how bonobos are truly xenophilic. They really are attracted to strangers. And that's because if there's no cost of making a new friend, you don't have to worry about them being aggressive towards you or hurting you. Well, then, I mean, you should let in the stranger because you can have a new friend. You can expand your social network and have the advantage of having that new friend. Okay, so it's a beautiful example of survival of friendliness, where selection for friendliness in males allowed for this new form of cooperation that we don't see in chimpanzees. All right, so now I want to move to think about humans. What does this all have to do with humans? I've told you about dogs and the evolution of cooperative communication in dogs, and using the fox model to think about self-domestication and bonobos being a candidate for self-domestication. I can't give you all the evidence. I just gave you one example of a study we did to test the self-domestication idea, and really truly showing we think that bonobos have been selected for a type of friendliness that allows for new forms of cooperation. What about humans? What I want to argue now is that humans have also evolved as a result of this self-domestication process. But what allows me to make that argument is the shocking realization within evolutionary anthropology that when I say humans, I have to be really specific about which species I'm talking about, because there were so many species of humans and there were so many species recently. In the last 10 to 15 years, the people have come to understand, and scientists have come to understand, especially obviously paleoanthropologists who are the ones working and making these discoveries, that we were not alone until 50,000 years ago, maybe 25,000 years ago. Some people have argued there were other humans that we shared the planet with. Oh my gosh, it's so crazy to imagine what that would be like if some of them had survived, but they did not. And so then that raises the question, well, what happened to them and why are we the only human left? Well, one of the things that you have to immediately throw away when you come to the realization that these other species were around 50 to 100,000 years ago is they all had big brains. They had brains that were similar in size to our own brain. They left behind cultural evidence that they had very sophisticated cultural abilities. Neanderthals, for instance, had weapons. They made glue. They buried their dead. I mean, we could keep going. So it's not that they weren't cultural. And also, they almost certainly had linguistic capabilities. There was a new paper published last week that showed that arguing that Neanderthals had the ability to understand different phonemes that would allow for some kind of linguistic communication. So it is not that our extinct relatives were not pretty sophisticated in ways that we would be impressed by. And why is that important to think about our own species evolution? Well, the normal thing, if you were to ask somebody, why are humans different from other animals? We would say we have big brains, we're cultural, and we have language. Well, all of these other extinct humans had those abilities, but they went extinct. The only thing that big brains and language and culture predict is extinction, not survival and success. So that opens up the door to think about how our species of human, Homo sapiens, must have had an extra ingredient. There must have been something else in addition to big brains, culture, and language. And I think it was survival of the friendliest that pushed us through a process of self-domestication and allowed our species to thrive while the other humans went extinct. This picture, I think, is the quickest way for me to explain what I think was the selection pressure that allowed humans to outsurvive our species, Homo sapien, to outsurvive the other human species, and why we're here and the others aren't. This picture depicts a completely brand new social category that evolves in humans that exists in no other species. No other species has the social category of the in-group stranger, a stranger that is actually part of my group, someone I have never met before and I don't know, but you are actually part of my group. That doesn't exist in any other species, and it is facilitated by a psychological ability we have to recognize social identity. So the idea that we have a group identity, that our group actually has some agreed upon characteristic that we all recognize. So in this picture, these are all Duke students. They go to the university that I teach at, and they're all rooting for the sports team there that everybody loves, the basketball team. But the key thing is these are all people who are freshmen or sophomore. They're in their first or second year. They're from all over the world, all over the United States. Nobody knew each other, more than a year or maybe a few months. And just like penguins, they're mushed in there, hugging. They've painted themselves the same color. They're screaming like crazy because they all share this social identity. Complete strangers are able to form friendships and socially bond in a way that other humans I do not think we're capable of. And it allows us to do something that the other species couldn't do. So if each of these faces represents a different group of humans, so this would be group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. And these would be, let's say, before there's self-domestication, there's a little bit of interaction between different human groups and the other human species or in our ancestors. But when we have friendliness selected for, and friendliness through this social identity that allows us to form friendships with strangers that we recognize as part of our group based on some socially constructed identity, well, that means now we can interact between groups with strangers in a way that no other species could. Well, who cares? Well, we care a lot, because what that allows for is an absolute explosion in innovation, technology, and cultural knowledge being shared instead of between a few dozen individuals. Instead of just dozens, it would be hundreds or thousands of individuals. So innovation, culture, the ratchet effect, as it's known, explodes and becomes much more rapid and powerful. And so we can evolve our culture at an absolute breakneck pace, much faster than the other human species can, and we can adapt much more quickly than they can. It supercharges culture, the evolution of the in-group stranger, and the fact that we can recognize a tattoo or a language or a hairstyle or a type of clothing as something that it signifies that somebody else is in our group. I've never met them before, but I like them. They're like me, and I can work together with them, and I'm not going to be aggressive with them. In fact, I would like to be near them and hang out with them. So we came up with a model of self-domestication in humans. I won't go through it, but I will just point you again to the Hare 2017 Annual Review of Psychology paper if you want to read more about the exact argument. But because I've kind of already gone through it for you. But the key thing is we're gonna go through some of the main. The key thing today is we're gonna go through a couple of the major predictions of this hypothesis. All right. So the first is that, do you remember the foxes? They had those shorter muzzles as a result of selection for friendliness. Their faces changed. They had, actually their teeth changed as well. They had smaller canine teeth. Their teeth are more crowded. You see the same effect in bonobos compared to chimpanzees. So the question was, what if we look within humans over the last 100,000 years, or sorry, I should say humans over the last 100,000 years to humans older than 100,000 years. And when I say humans, I mean individuals that are recognized as Homo sapien in the fossil record. And we look at fossil faces and see, do we have a change in the facial structure over the last 100,000 years when we think there must have been this selection for friendliness as a result of group identity occurring and allowing for the process I was just telling you about with the cultural ratcheting. So what we did, and this is with Steve Churchill and Bob Sari, they did all the hard work. I just got to, be involved and have fun seeing all their hard work come to fruition. But what we found is that the older human fossils up in the top left of this figure, hopefully you can see my arrow, they had much more masculine faces. They had really big brow ridges. Their faces were wide and long, but as you look at humans and skulls and faces of humans that were younger, closer to now, and given ages that were, that this human was alive in the last 80,000 years, what you see is that the brow ridge starts to go away, the face becomes narrower and shorter. And that's true for hunter-gatherer skulls that are from even relatively recent period as well. So what you see is consistent with facial features that change in other animals when you have selection for friendliness. You actually see the same type of facial features being altered in our own species over the last 100,000 years or so as self-domestication and selection for friendliness is occurring. Another predicted difference, and this is something that I am sharing for the students out there because this is a huge discovery if we can ever demonstrate this. The prediction of the self-domestication hypothesis is, obviously when you have selection for friendliness, like in the foxes, there's, I didn't mention it, but their coat colors change. It does change they do have white spots on their forehead, and their fur changes color and in really interesting ways. But what would be the equivalent in humans? Well, what I think it is white sclera. So humans are the only primate that has this white part of the eye around the pupil. All humans, every single human being, it is the most universal trait. It has no variability in humans. We all have this white sclera. It's crazy. We have different hair color. We have different everything. But the one thing that does not differ morphologically is white sclera. So we know that white sclera is really important for cooperative communication. It allows us to have that oxytocin loop between humans, actually. When our brain actually recognizes sclera, it's how we actually, our brain recognizes another human being. And it's what then initiates a lot of the social cooperative communicative abilities that allow for theory of mind. So the prediction we've made is that only Homo sapiens had white sclera, that the other species of humans actually looked more like this. So wait for it to adjust for a minute. And these are actually chimpanzee eyes that I've put over this reconstruction of a Homo erectus. And this is what our extinct ancestors would have looked like. I think that they did not have white sclera because white sclera evolved for the purpose of cooperative communication late in human evolution as a byproduct of selection for friendliness. And the way we would need to test it and the opportunity for someone who is a brilliant student is to use ancient DNA techniques to look at genes involved in sclera formation and see if they date and if they've been altered and there's evidence for positive selection around the time we're predicting of self-domestication. It could be that white sclera are much older and the hypothesis would be falsified. But that's the prediction. Anyway, you think about who you'd rather work with if somebody walked into your office, right? I think you want to work with that guy. This guy is a little intimidating, right? So white sclera has this massive impact on our ability to bond and to cooperatively communicate. All right, so I've got, I think, maybe 5-10 minutes. And what I want to do is turn and we've been talking about survival of the friendliest and how that friendliness leads to cooperation. But there's this human paradox. And I want to, over the last 5-10 minutes, talk to you about what does survival of the friendliest tell us about that paradox, and how can we have a friendlier future as a result? Well, we are, what I would argue, as a result of recognizing Ingroup Strangers, we are the friendliest species of human to ever evolve, and that's what allowed us to outcompete the other humans. But that doesn't mean that we are only friendly. And in fact, the argument we make in the book, Survival of Friendliness, is the very mechanism that allows for our friendliness when it turns off, and unfortunately it's designed to turn off. It is that exact mechanism when it turns off is what then allows us to be so cruel. It explains the paradox of how we're the kindest and cruelest species. I'm going to use a bear to demonstrate what I mean. So in a bear, what is the most beautiful thing to see is a mother playing with her offspring, nurturing, caring, loving. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful or friendly or kind. Okay, but think about, when is the absolute worst time to be around a bear? And when is it that a bear would be most aggressive and violent? If you threatened her cubs. She would show the most violence of any bear that you could possibly interact with to defend those that she loves, her offspring. So what we think happened in human evolution is, as our in-group strangers or this group identity evolved, we bond with those group members as strongly as family. That the group actually then becomes like family, like offspring. And when those family, and so, instead of just offspring, we actually care and have friendliness towards these groups that we see as like ourselves, group members that we see as like ourselves. And we can be as wonderful and friendly towards them as a bear is towards the offspring. But and that leads to cooperative communication in interesting ways. But when those identities or those group members are threatened, then it shuts down our ability to cooperatively communicate. And we become like a mama bear is towards threats for their offspring. We become like a mama bear towards our group identity and the group members that we care and love about as if they're family members. And that's what sets up the possibility for horrific human violence. And when I say our cooperative communicative ability shut off, what I'm talking about is our theory of mind, our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to imagine what it's like to be someone else, to even see another human as being fully human, turns off. So I want to tell you about the mechanism of dehumanization now, which I think is how the unique features of our mind are designed to shut down, unfortunately. So there's work by Noor Kataili, and I'm going to show you a little bit of data from our own group showing that when you ask people the following question, use the sliders below, indicate how evolved you consider each of the following individual or groups to be. So you have a list of different groups of types of groups of people, and you ask people to say how evolved are those different groups. Okay, this is a horrifying finding. I just want to warn everybody that it's a very disturbing finding about human nature, but this is the data. So when you ask people how evolved are different groups of people, you would hope, and I hope everybody would agree, it doesn't matter what group these people are from, they're all human, they're all fully human, they're all Homo sapien. But that's not what everybody answers. There's always a portion of people who take these surveys who do not attribute full humanity to individuals of different groups. So this is would represent a sample, for instance, from the United States, but this might be a sample from another country, maybe in the Middle East or whatever. So depending on where you ask people, different groups are attributed full humanity or are not attributed full humanity. But what you see universally, wherever this has been deployed, is that people, a portion, not everybody, but a portion of people do not attribute full humanity. And it doesn't matter across race, across socioeconomic status. And also we have data on children. This is data where we asked over 100 kids, 5 to 12 years of age, a heterogeneous sample. We asked them about different groups, in-groups and out-groups, and you can see that a large portion of them actually said that the human face that best represents the out-group is this face that is the face of a doll that's not a human face. Obviously, the answer is a human face. And so this is increasing evidence that even at a very young age, right as theory of mind, the theory of mind abilities that allow for cooperative communication develop in each individual, it also, the mechanism for those abilities to shut off are developing as well and potentially allow for dehumanization. Why do we care about dehumanization? Because it ends up that when people dehumanize in this way, it actually predicts that they're much more willing to accept violence against the other groups that they're dehumanizing. And it is much more predictive of acceptance of violence against other human groups than other measures that typically measure what we would call prejudice or a liking or disliking of another group. So if people are willing to dehumanize another group, they're more accepting of violence, whereas they may be prejudiced against a group, but they wouldn't be accepting of violence. So it seems that dehumanization is even worse than prejudice. Okay. So there is evidence that it is when people feel that their identity is threatened or that another group is somehow disgusting, that it shuts down the regions of the brain that allow for that cooperative, communicative, mentalizing, imagining that someone's trying to help me or someone's like me, that those areas of the brain shut down and cooperative communication turns off. And there's also disturbing evidence that the number one thing that predicts whether someone will accept dehumanization of another group is if they feel the other group is dehumanizing them. So the number one threat that leads someone to dehumanize another group is if they perceive that their own social identity is being dehumanized. It's called reciprocal dehumanization. And that's where you have a horrible cycle of one group feeling dehumanized and responding with dehumanization, and then the other group feels dehumanized and responds with dehumanization. Now you have two groups of people who are not attributing full human cognition or humanity to the other group. Unfortunately, that means they're going to have a hard time cooperatively communicating, and also it means that there's the possibility for moral exclusion, that because somebody's viewed, a group is not viewed as fully human, they're not fully moral, and I don't have to behave in a fully moral way towards them, and it allows for the potential of horrific violence. All right, so given that we have this unbelievable friendliness relative, and it's the secret to our success, it's how we evolved and outcompeted other humans via self-domestication, but unfortunately we have this switch that can turn it off. How can we have a friendlier future? I promised that we would talk about that. I think I'm probably almost out of time, but I can do it in a couple of minutes. I hope you'll hang with me. And it is this, there's really, really nice evidence that it's not about teaching, it's not about knowledge that's going to summon our better biological angels or allow for a friendlier future. It's really all about how we structure society, whether it's through liberal democracy or having social contact and integrating different groups that see each other as potentially competing with each other, but instead having cross-group friendships, friendships that can act as bridges between groups, The pictures here are in an American context, but basically the idea is that both of these pictures represent people who are in groups that were potentially in a dangerous place and potentially even dehumanizing one another. But these friendships and demonstrations of the friendship allow for bridges that then rehumanize populations that are dehumanizing each other. Because one of the seeing the data on dehumanization is depressing and frightening, but one of the exciting positive things from all the evidence is that you can as easily humanize a group as dehumanize them, and that it's very quick to potentially change in most people. If you reduce the perception of threat, and you even illustrate the existence of cross-group friendships, it very rapidly humanizes different groups, and then you can continue to emphasize the common humanity. It tends to dial down the threat and feeling for the need for violence or aggression. Okay, so just my final point about liberal democracy, since it was brought up, is based on the best evidence. We didn't evolve as despots. Our species is not a species that evolved via some selective pressure to be aggressive and violent and have alpha males rule. Instead, we evolved through survival of the friendliest, and liberal democracy is actually one of our greatest tools that's ever been invented, where we have large-scale populations, large societies that are negotiating and having peaceful transitions of power, where one group is winning power over the other group, but there's a peaceful transition of power. And while you are out of power, you still have a voice, and you still can make your arguments, and you can regain power through a peaceful transition. And really, it's democracy that I think, along with cross-group friendships, that has the greatest power in terms of the solution to promise a friendlier future for our species. So it's with that I wrap up, and I wish all of you the best, and thank you for the attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. We have a bunch of questions, and unfortunately, I haven't read Survival of the Friendliest book, but I think this is a really great chance for us to read. And I was actually thinking that maybe as a Boğaziçi Science Committee, we can have a book reading together, because this looks really interesting, and we have a bunch of questions, but we don't want to take much of your time, so we just pick some of the questions. If that's okay, we would like to ask you like 3 or 4 questions, and then we can wrap up. So I'm giving the microphone to my friends so they can ask you the questions.
Again, thank you for the presentation. It was very enlightening, and also we have a good questions in mind. Are bonobos more gentle because they are female-dominated, or since they are female-dominated, they are more gentle? What is the correlation between their characteristics and genders, and also how does gender affect cooperation?
That's a great question. So in the literature, bonobos are often described as, and in the popular press, they're often described as female-dominant. I actually don't think, from the biological definition of female dominance, I don't think bonobos are female dominant. Species that are female dominant, it tends to be that females are larger than the males, and that all females dominate all males. Hyenas are an example. Lemurs are an example where females evolve to actually be more male-like. They become masculinized, and that's how they then dominate the smaller males. That's not what happened in bonobos. It's that bonobo females actually are still very female, and it's the males that actually became friendlier. And so they have this very interesting social system, and we've made an argument that it's not that bonobos are female dominant, they're actually baby dominant. And what I mean by that is the remarkable thing about bonobos is there's never been an observed case of infanticide where a bonobo kills a baby bonobo in their own group or another group. Now, that's something that happens very commonly in many primate species, but bonobos have no infanticide. And so what we think is, and having observed at Lola, the sanctuary where we work, is if a baby is threatened, if a baby screams and is scared, you better get out of the way because the whole group is coming and to protect that baby. And that's very different than in chimpanzees, where if a chimpanzee baby screams, the mother will come. Maybe the mother and a sibling will come, but that's it. In the case of bonobos, it's everybody's coming to protect that bonobo baby. And when we did a dominance test, it ends up that some of the highest ranking individuals in a bonobo group are some of the little babies.
Well, please.
I want to thank you again for this wonderful presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is, due to our anthropocentric approach, we tend to think in terms of humans when it comes to what friendliest means. It is very hard to make a definition, but is cooperation just enough to be friends with the animal world? How do we define friendship in animal kingdom, and how does domestication play a role in being friendliest?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about friendliness, I'm not talking just about how we might think about friendliness in our own relationships, socially bonding, and this person's like me, and I enjoy interacting with them, and we have these shared interests, etc. Friendliness to me is a much broader thing if we start thinking about the biological world, and all I'm talking about is there's a pro-social, a positive social interaction that happens. It probably benefits both of us, and it can be very selfishly motivated on both of our parts. We both want and benefit and selfishly profit from this interaction. But the point is that it's not antisocial. It's not, that when I do this, it hurts you. It's something where I'm attracted to you. I want to be together. We both somehow benefit, or at least one of us benefits, but the other doesn't get hurt by it. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about friendliness. And that, of course, includes the richer type of friendliness that exists between human friendships.
Thank you very much. And now we have two more questions, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. Today, Dr. Yamamoto also mentioned the food sharing and friendly relationship of bonobos. You also showed us the video that they share their food. We don't see this kind of habits in animal world, and so what does this say about the human world? What can we learn from bonobos?
Oh, bonobos. I tell people all the time, I try to be a better bonobo male every day. Yeah, I think the big lesson is, especially in, what has been a popular idea in Western culture for so long, that, survival of the fittest means big, bad, dominant, superior, and that groups that are somehow big, bad, and dominant are somehow have more value in society. That is not what the science suggests, and that is, that may be your argument, your political argument, but do not come and talk about that based on any science, because bonobos are a fantastic example where the most successful male bonobo in terms of reproduction is more successful than the most successful chimpanzee male in the wild. So I really, truly, it is that being friendly wins and pays huge dividends in terms of reproductive success. What I'm talking about is people went and measured how many babies the most successful male bonobo has that has the most babies. And that successful male bonobo has more babies than the most successful big bad alpha chimpanzee male in any group that has ever been measured. So it really is the case that the friendliness of male bonobos pays off in terms of their success, their evolutionary success. So I think that's the big lesson for bonobos, is that friendliness pays, and what a remarkable thing. We have this close relative that has never been observed to kill. They have a brain a third the size of our own, but they've never been observed to murder one another. If only we could do that.
Thank you. And let's take the last question before taking too much of your time. And Çağatay, are you asking, or who is asking it?
Okay. Dr. Hare, you mentioned the physical differences in the control line and experimental line of foxes around in the middle of your speech. Can this situation be considered as speciation in the long term? I mean, they will be so different after a while, as we see with dog and wolf examples. Will it be the same process with the foxes too?
Yeah. So the idea is that if you kept selecting, there would potentially be speciation. But species is such a complicated concept in biology, and if you have the strictest definition of species that two populations can't reproduce with each other to create fertile offspring, I don't think chimpanzees and bonobos would meet that requirement, because we know that unfortunately some people have had bonobos and chimpanzees in captivity reproduce together. But we do know because of that they could create viable offspring. So I think that the foxes would be recognizable as different species, not because they couldn't interbreed with one another, but because if you release them into the wild, I think they would probably behave very differently than one another, and they probably space in space, together. And so that might be how you could think about that.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the information and your great presentation. We hope that we'll have you again, maybe after the pandemic, in person.
That'd be so fun.
Yes, that will be amazing for us as well. Maybe with Dr. Yamamoto as well. That will be amazing. So you can talk about your bonobo research together, and also dog research, horse research. It is amazing that you both work in very interspecies area with very interdisciplinary area. That is very inspiring for us. Although we don't have much of primatology or animal work in terms of etology in Turkey, I think this is a great start for us as well with your talks. Once again, thank you very much, and thank you Boğaziçi University Science Club for organizing this. This is a great talk, and we're looking very much forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
We will continue with Marion DeVos this Wednesday and finish the month of evolution with Jane Goodall this Saturday. We will be waiting for your participation. See you all.